The Commission of Inquiry into the feasibility of free higher education is continuing with its public hearings. The Fees Commission, chaired by Judge Jonathan Hare, was established last year by President Jacob Zuma to investigate the feasibility of free higher education and training. Now, during representations at the Fees Commission, the DA Shadow Minister of Higher Education and Training, Professor Belinda Bozzoli, opposed students' call for free higher education. Now, to talk about the DA's representations and then the students' call for free higher education, we are joined by Busisiwe Seabe, who's one of the activists of the Fees Must Fall movement. Very good morning to you, Busi. Thanks
good morning
for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Now, first up, we saw yesterday the Higher Education Minister said there's a hole of R1 billion on campuses and so forth, and somehow we need to find a way to recoup the money. How do you guys think about that as the student movement?
At this point in time, we honestly believe he cannot blame students for the R1 billion that has supposedly been spent on campuses. The minister, along with our institutions of higher learning and management, agreed to allow things like police onto our campuses, to allow private security onto our campuses, which meant that students needed to be militant in response to the violence that we were receiving. So if you're finding buildings have been burnt, if you're finding windows have been broken, it has only been where students were defending themselves against such authorities, against such violence on our institutions, and that's where a bulk of the money is coming from. So essentially he cannot blame the R1 billion on students, and we recognize what he's trying to do also at the Durban University of Technology by keeping someone like Bonginkosi Khanyile, who's the only surviving political prisoner of our generation, in prison by claiming that he has cost the state over 600 million on its own. That is absolutely ridiculous. There is no such thing as one individual or a collective of individuals who have maintained their peaceful form of protest being responsible for such an amount of money.
Do you condemn the burning of things like libraries and the like, though?
I wouldn't say condemn. I understand more than anything. There's something liberating about fire. There's a sort of rebirthing that comes from fire. But one thing that we have strived to do as Fees Must Fall is that we have maintained our non-violent approach. We've maintained that we will not burn buildings, we will not aggravate the police or private security. But when we have to defend ourselves in that instance, we will be militant but not violent.
What do you make then of the DA's opposition to free higher education across the board?
I mean, of course, it's something that would come from the DA. The DA is sitting at a position of privilege at the moment. The DA represents, to a large extent, the middle class of this country. And even though you find a large constituency of black people voting in the DA and being part of the DA, you understand that those black people are willing to indebt themselves to banks, to loan sharks, in order to pay for something like education. Whereas the majority of the country, which is poor, does not have, that ability, cannot indebt themselves. So the DA stance on free education is something that is well expected. I mean, when you look at the political history of the DA itself, it is a merger of a lot of apartheid parties that came through, from the Unionist Party to other parties as well that came and consolidated together. We can understand that they wouldn't understand what a call for free, quality, decolonized education is, because also it threatens their membership. Because once black people are aware and they're conscious of their history and also the history of the DA, no sound black person would ever vote for the DA.
The Fees Commission, set up by the President just over a year ago, to come up with solutions in the space of, call it the tertiary education sector. What do you make of the work thus far?
I mean, we want to take the Fees Commission very seriously. We want to as students. But this is like the third, fourth Fees Commission that the President or presidents since Tata Mandela have set up. So essentially, we don't have faith in the Commission, but we're willing to engage with them to see what kind of, proposals we could come up with. Because as Fees Must Fall, we have constructed our own model on how to fund free, quality, decolonized education. And in the process of this Fees Commission, we expect to be seated there with them. We expect to actually head those discussions as opposed to the Fees Commission themselves sitting independently and making decisions. It is only when students themselves are actively involved in the Fees Commission where we can give our recommendations that we will be able to take the Fees Commission seriously.
Will we see more Fees Must Fall protests this year?
I mean, you know, on a matter of strategy and tactics, there will always be resistance. Where there is oppression, there will be resistance, and that is something that we will maintain as Fees Must Fall. We may not protest in the organic forms of protest as you've seen in the past 2 years, but we will be engaging the state, but especially the private sector this year, to say that they need, not only as ABSA is about to pay back their reparations, but other companies as well need to come to the forefront. If it means that companies must be taxed, we're coming for the private sector as well, because we understand that our struggle is not against institutions. It's not with Wits University, it's not with the University of Cape Town, but it's essentially with the state and the public sector and the private sector as well, and that's something that we're going to engage on. We have already started in some provinces, you know, to just bring a bit of a highlight as to what Fees Must Fall is going to bring this year, especially with the accommodation crisis that is happening across the country. You've seen in the Western Cape, some universities have already shut down, asking for accommodation for students so that we can all just settle in. But what Fees Must Fall will be doing for the remainder of the year is we're going to consolidate the ground, we're going to go into communities and mobilize there, and you might just see us come up earlier than you would expect us.
So, in conclusion, what does free education, free decolonized education, mind you. Quality, free decolonized education. What does that look like for my child who's 10 years old?
What it looks like for your child is if your child wants to go into, for an example, the health sciences faculty, they will be able to get an indigenous kind of education system, a curriculum that is rooted in our indigenous people, that is rooted in our culture and our heritage as people. They will get an education that says even sangomas and gomas are welcome within our curriculum. We need to be able to learn how we were able to progress as individuals outside of the westernized medicine that we know. When you go into the Faculty of Humanities, you'll find people who are able to understand, interpret, and also challenge ideologically their history, not only their history, but the things that they're studying as well. You're looking at people who will be able to reconstruct the economy. We're looking at people who will be able to reconstruct the law, because we must remember the law that we're abiding by at the moment is a law that was set up by our colonizers, by the people who ran the apartheid system. We need to see and we need to reinvent education. We need to reinvent the concept of education, and that's what you can expect your 10-year-old to learn in the next 10 years.
You've got a long struggle ahead of you, my dear. Thank you for joining us today.